Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Even today, there are still rural counties whose main claim to fame is doing very little of anything. Life moves at a snail's pace because there are no factories, corporate offices, or tourist attractions. Just a series of nearly deserted downtown areas, one after another. These places are dotted with countless crossroads, remnants of a bygone era scattered throughout the landscape. Some of these counties are so impoverished and untamed that they provide the ideal setting for both illegal and legitimate businesses to operate, tucked away from the hustle and bustle of modern life. One of those tiny dots on the map is the crossroads town of Portage. It had never been a bustling hub of commerce, but it once boasted a small market, a farmer's exchange, and a service station. All of those businesses shuttered during the peak of the Walmart era, though the local restaurant managed to hang on, probably because even country folks need a meal now and then. The old service station eventually became a small hybrid of all the closed stores. At the Portage Market, you could fill up your gas tank, buy a pound of butter, or even find a screwdriver for sale. Chances are, you could also score a dime bag of pot if you knew where to ask. The former three-bay service station made for a passable country store, though it still looked very much like an abandoned service station with a minor facelift. Law enforcement in the area consisted of several sheriff's deputies who patrolled the county. Major crimes, however, were handled by the state police, as they would have overwhelmed the limited resources of the deputies. As I mentioned, Portage was just a speck on the county map, which hung on the wall at the county seat. Traffic in county seat would triple on the first Monday of every month when the circuit court was in session. Portage was simply a part of the larger, sleepy God, guns, and pickup trucks culture that politicians mocked during non-election years. Over the winter, residents of Portage noticed a woman visiting the old brick building several times. It had last been used as a small grocery store about 20 years ago. Her frequent visits suggested she was quite interested in the building, meeting with the realtor on 2 separate occasions. On the last of those trips, she brought along a man who looked like he might be her sugar daddy. The couple stopped for lunch at the Main Street Cafe, a holdover from the days when state roads connected the countryside, linking crossroads towns like Portage. Back then, cafes like this one sprang up along rural routes to serve the motoring public. Though the state had removed the highway designation from the road to Portage, the cafe still stood. The food at the cafe was fresh and tasty for the most part, provided you preferred simple, straightforward meals, just the kind of fare Fred enjoyed. As a retired enlisted Marine, Fred had never developed a taste for the finer things in life. On their first visit to the cafe, Fred and the much younger woman were on a mission, scouting locations for their business ventures. After having lunch, they met with the local realtor, then continued on to explore other potential sites. By the time they ate in the cafe again, they had decided that they would settle either in Portage or an equally small town several miles away. Since there were small buildings abandoned along many of the former state highways, their search had been long. The building in Portage would require the least renovation, and the price was right. It also was in a designated rural service zone for the ladies' business. Fred had waited until after a hard rain to decide which of the 2 buildings he would make a lease, with the option to buy, offer. His motto had always been keep it simple, stupid, so that was his frame of mind at the time of his lunch with Kathy. He liked things simple because he was no spring chicken. He was a 55-year-old man with a 25-year-old daughter at his side. They had the lunch special on that early spring morning while they waited for the realtor to show. Fred could see the empty former grocery store parking lot through the window of the cafe. "Well, Daddy, what do you think?" Kathy asked. "I think your mama would be proud of you," Fred said. "Enough with the compliments. Which building are you going to lease?" she asked. "I guess it's the Portage and a Pear Tree," Fred said with a very infectious grin. "So are you going to miss the big city?" "For about 10 minutes. Besides, we can get into Lucille in 10 minutes. Lucille has everything we need. Well, I have lived in some pretty isolated places over the years, but you haven't. You might find you miss the variety available in a larger place. Trust me, colleges are pretty isolated. If not by miles, by attitude," she informed him. "Well, it should be interesting. You sure as hell are not going to get rich in Portage," he informed her. "No, I won't, but neither will you," Kathy said. "I don't have to get rich. My life is mostly over," Fred said. "Let's just move the conversation along," she suggested, smiling at her father. Kathy had tried to explain her career to him a few times. He just didn't get all the intricacies of the new ACA. She had a master's degree in nursing from the state university, so under the new medical system, she was entitled to operate a primary care clinic. She had explained 10 times that her clinic would be the entrance gate to the grounds of the medical establishment. She was like a security guard, she explained. She was there to help those she could, but also to send those who needed more help to the right place as efficiently as possible. for that she could bill the government a ridiculous fee. The government had provided the financing for the clinic. From the stories she had been told about her type clinic, she learned that the government never let them fail. They also never allowed them to make as much money as they had before the ACA. She was trading a government-financed and instantly approved clinic for a lot of money down the line. His business, unlike that of his daughter, was going to take longer to get a foothold. Nobody cared if Fred was a success or not. Unlike Kathy's clinic, the federal government had no vested interest in his success or failure. Kathy's clinic was up and running much faster than Fred's bike business. There were at least two good reasons why. One was simply the ACA promise of a huge improvement in rural medicine, so the pressure was on for clinics like Kathy's. The second reason was that Fred had more things to physically do before he could open. Kathy, on the other hand, just unlocked the door, unpacked the equipment which came with the plug-and-play package from the government. The price she paid seemed steep to Fred. He admitted that he knew nothing about the price of such things. So when Kathy told him the individual equipment would have cost if purchased separately, he believed her. The government most likely had no idea what the cost of the equipment was. They only knew that they wanted the clinic open. It was a campaign promise that every politician made. Improve healthcare and lower the cost. They were at least trying to throw money at the problem. 2 days after the clinic arrived on the back of a truck, it was open for business in a grocery store's parking lot. The availability of utilities quickly was one of the reasons the ACA administration approved the location so quickly. Meanwhile, the motor bicycle business was still in the building renovation phase. The 2 bathrooms were a mess, and only one of them was fully operational. Fred scrubbed the toilet and sink and thanked God that he had at least one functional toilet. The janitor's sink in the large storage room required a lot of cleaning, but it was also functional. Fred and Kathy had their 2-week anniversary lunch at the dinner. "So, Kathy, how is business?" Fred asked. "Well, it didn't start with them lining the parking lot, but I'm going to stay open for sure. There are enough indigent people in the county and enough EMS evaluations for sure to keep the doors open. I have treated 6 patients brought by EMS and forward just as many on to the ER at James County General. Strange that I get some of the gang members from Lucille 10 miles away. I have no idea why they would drive. All this was to visit a clinic with less equipment and services," Kathy commented. "I have no idea, but be careful with those punks. Most of them are high, and it doesn't take much to set them off. Some of them are just mean, and some of them are radicals. One is as dangerous as the other. So, what are you going to do about a place for us to live? Your little condo is too far away for us to keep commuting," Kathy said. "I'm not selling it for sure," Fred said. "It's paid for, and it don't eat." "Mind if I made a suggestion?" Kathy asked. "Could I stop you?" Fred asked her. "Probably not," she admitted. "That storage room you have across the rear wall, turn it into an on-call room. Most hospitals have something like it. We could both use it. We could easily fit a couple of cots in there. And a cabinet with a microwave and dorm refrigerator. I could actually build that. I have all these tools here, so why not?" he agreed. "I will need a plumber, since you need a shower." After that lunch, it took 3 more weeks before Fred even began working on a bike. He had amassed 30 broken or working bicycles and cardboard boxes of parts galore. Fred had a place for everything, and it was all in its place on the Wednesday, when he started on his first motobike. That was how he planned to market them. He also planned to push the limits to squeeze the most out of the government rules and regulations on motor-assisted bicycles. Most everyone had come to accept that the actual motor could be run using more volts than the specifications suggested. They might run a year less than the 10-year estimates, but they performed better. The ampere pull of the engine had to remain within specifications to make sure there was no large overheating problem. His so-called assist motor was supposed to run at 24 V30 amps, so the motors were rated at 750 watts. At 750 watts, the motors were legal by a good margin. Fred had experimented and found that the motor ran just fine on 36 volts and the 30 amps. At that configuration, they ran at a little over the federal regulations for total watts. That was the bad news. The good news was that the motor still met the 750 watt specification, at least on paper. Fred thought of the modifications as a supercharger. Fred hung his giant KISS sign over the assembly station and began work. Since mountain bikes had the strongest frame, his first bike was built on a red one. His plan called for a front hub motor, a battery pack mounted over the rear wheel. Otherwise, the bike would be a standard mountain bike configuration. Each of his project bikes were going to have a coded label attached. The code would advise him of the amount of money he had invested in each part of the bike. His first build had been purchases for $14 at a yard sale. His total work had been to remove the wheels and tires from the frame, clean it as best he could, and even put a cute sticker over a scratch. The wheels had light rust on the rims, but the tires were in excellent condition. The front one was almost perfect. The light rust came off with just a quick rub with a soft wire brush. The front tire went onto the new front wheel hub motor. Fred fitted the electronic onto the motorbike and then added the off-the-shelf rack over the rear wheels. He didn't like the way the rack attached, so he decided that it would be the last off-the-shelf he purchased. He made notes on the price of the hub motor and the price of the off-the-shelf rack before he turned his attention to the batteries. Like everything else, Fred built his own batteries. He had learned to build battery packs on one of his assignments. He was in charge of a guard detachment on a radar station in the Arctic. The Marines guarded a new kind solar array, the panel. It had been new and super secret technology 15 years before, but the battery technology wasn't any longer a secret. The batteries weren't the new lithium designed. They had been a GAP battery. The GAP 15 years earlier had been an experimental lightweight, inexpensive nickel battery. When lithium hit the market, the nickel battery was doomed, except as a lightweight standby battery in electronics. The demand was limited, so the technology was passed over for years. The thing about the nickel batteries was they could be left on standby, with only a trickle charge. They could be left like that for years without any damage. It made them almost as effective as the lithium, if care was taken to refresh them before use. Fred found a recycle company willing to sell him the batteries from junked-out government equipment. He had to take the batteries as is. He got a good enough price to buy 20% more than he needed. When they arrived, he found that the batteries would no longer hold the top-end charge amount, but they would hold the lower charge just as long as they always had. Instead of the 1.35 volts per cell, the never-used batteries had a top end of 1.3 volts. His 12-volt build had 11 cells instead of 10. Otherwise, the performance was about the same. The weight was a 60% less than a traditional lead-acid batteries, but they weighed 25% more than a lithium battery. He had no idea what the life of the battery was going to be. He kept his supplier and the formula for building the packs a secret. He did not intend to have his supply of useful batteries diminished by the competition, should any arise. Since the first bike that Fred built was on a mountain bike frame with the standard suspension, he had to modify the suspension to accept the hub motor. The rear wheel mount would have required more finesse, and Fred was a sledgehammer kind of guy. He tested the mountain bike, then made a few adjustments. It had been built in less than a day. He put it on the web for sale at $800 without a battery or $999 with a 12-hour battery. It was a fair price. When everything was added up, the code told him he had $600 in the bike. It was a lot, but it was a bike that could be sold for almost $1,000. Of the two of them, Kathy was the first to begin work. She was also the first one to open for business. Not only that, she was also the first to hire an employee. She hired a local man as a receptionist. His name was Roger. Roger was thin and very clean. He was also very effeminate and slightly black. Roger, this is my father, Fred. Daddy, this is Ralph Samuelson. He's going to be answering our phones, keeping our calendar, and helping out at the clinic. Hello, Ralph, welcome aboard, Fred said, trying to set his tone on the friendly side of professional. He didn't care for Ralph's obvious lifestyle, but that wasn't his affair. Ralph went to work immediately. He took calls for the clinic so that Kathy could concentrate on her patients. Even though she had said he worked for both of them, Fred knew better. A couple of days later, Fred began work on a second bike. For his second build, he used a motor which was brand new, but designed for a large electric motor scooter. It was 24V 700 watts, and it required him to build a custom mount. He had designed and built one before in his workroom inside the condo. That workroom he emptied to give Kathy a place to hang her clothes and get away from the clinic where she did her residency. Fred and Kathy had reconnected after years of little or no contact. Her mother had kept them apart for reasons he didn't really know or understand. One day, Kathy just showed up at his condo door and demanded she be taken to dinner. She had chosen the town where Fred resided to do the clinical part of her training. He lived in the town because it was close to his last duty station. When they reconnected, he was in the final stages of retirement and was also floundering about. Kathy and Fred hit it off instantly. They turned heads wherever they went. Kathy was a young thing with flaming red hair which caught everyone's eye. She also dressed in the new punk-style clothes which her father did neither understand or approved. Fred, with his iron gray hair and ramrod straight back, was almost an accessory to her good looks. The girls, although he was such a perfect gentleman, and Kathy was such a punk, they were the real walking contradiction. After Fred got over trying to protect her and give her fatherly advice, they became good friends. She had slept on his sofa for a few months while she looked for a place. Finally, he decided to pack his tools away and allow her the use of his guest room. Fred knew that part of his appeal was his condo, which was located in a small town 20 minutes from the North Carolina's beach communities. Kathy loved the location, and she discovered that she loved her stick-up his butt father as well. They were good roommates as well. All that factored into her attitude when the hospital administrator for the even more rural County Medical Association came to visit her. She jumped at his offer of grants and low-cost loans. She didn't even discuss it with her father. While Kathy stitched up a knife wound, Fred mounted his homemade engine to the badly used bike. His homemade bike had a motor turning a scooter while sitting on top of a custom bike. The wheel-on-wheel design was simple. It might not be perfectly efficient, but it was pretty damn good, he knew. You know, I planned to use you for a place to live near the beach. I was planning to stay a few weeks till I got paid a couple of times, then move out, Kathy said over dinner. Yeah, I knew, but what the hell? I needed a kick in the butt to get started in a new direction. Fred admitted. And to help you cut back on your drinking, she said. That's your mother talking. I had already stopped drinking, more or less. Fred informed her. The government payments have started to arrive. There is enough money to pay my receptionist and keep the door open for sure. I might even be able to start paying my share of the lunches, Kathy suggested. A $3 burger is the least of my expenses, Fred said. Are you all right? I keep forgetting you are in business as well. I get so caught up in my own shit, she said. Honey, I'm fine. I just like to see you worry a little, Fred suggested. I do worry, but not so much about your shop. If worst came to worst, I could expend the clinic into the shop, she said. So anytime you get tired of it or you get tired of me, don't hesitate to tell me, Kathy demanded. If that happens, I will tell you for sure, he said. He was sure that she could see the pride he felt. She had accomplished so much under difficult circumstances. You know, Dad, you never asked me where I went when I took off for a couple of days at a time, she said. Do you want me to ask? Fred commented. Well, I won't tell you, but yeah, I would like to know you care, Kathy said while she toyed with her French fries. You have that new nurse practitioner, who I haven't met, coming in tomorrow. I assume that means you are planning for more time to go to the beach. Is now the time to ask what your plans are? Well, Dad, my plan for now is to show the new impy the ropes, then spend some time catching up on my sleep. Kathy said. Good, you need it, he said. So enough about me, where are you on the bikes? She asked. I have my first one built, and I'm riding it all over hell. I have started the second type bike, and I will have it in production now that I have figured out the mount, he informed her. Good for you, Kathy said, and obviously meant it. Just then she got a call. James County Rescue has a delivery, she informed him. Then take the burger with you, he suggested. Kathy stood to walk away. You want me to get this? She asked. Call it a going-away present, Fred suggested. Okay, but I'm not going anywhere. It's your condo and your studio apartment in the meat locker, she said with a laugh. You need to go, he said. Now? Yes, I do. See you later, Kathy said as she turned again to the door. After lunch, Fred returned to finish his first Rhino bike. He named it that because of the motor and scooter wheel sitting on top of the front wheel gave the bike the profile of a rhinoceros. The bells on his front door tinkled, so he turned his attention to the person who entered. Hello there, he said to the middle-aged man who entered. Hello, I saw your ad on the local business line. I'm with the local TV station, he said. You mean Portage has a TV station? Fred asked with false wonder in his voice. In a way, we cover news from all over the eastern part of the state. Today I wanted to interview you. Well, I do if you were the owner, he asked. So, you were the one who got stuck with covering the old fart news, Fred commented with a grin. We like to call them stories with a local interest, he said, smiling. Come on, you do the happy news, Fred said. Hey, I will be happy to have you cover the story. Okay, I'll be back tomorrow with the cameraman, he said. You never told me your name. I don't watch much local news. Fred said. Ralph, he said. Everyone just calls me Ralph. Well, I'll see you tomorrow, just Ralph, Fred said. Fred drove his old pickup the 20-plus miles to his condo after he finished with the Rhino. He wanted a good night's sleep and a real shower before his TV debut. Ralph was right on time the next morning. They met at the diner where they did the off-camera interview conversation, then went right to the shop and began filming. So what kind of range do these bikes get? Ralph asked the inevitable question. Ralph, that is like a car. It just depends. In this area, with our standard battery, a 120-pound rider could get about a 20-mile ride. Trust me, that's about all you want to do on a bike like this. So are you going to demonstrate it for our viewers? Ralph asked. I'm going to go you one better. I'm going to have my daughter's friend demo it. He has never ridden one of my bikes, so you will either see how easy it is or how strong they are if he falls off it, Fred said. Needless to say, Fred was a little worried. He needn't have been. Kathy's receptionist took to it instantly. They waited while he rode down the main street of town, then turned and rode past them. I want it, he said when he got off. I'm serious. I can ride that to work. You realize we were going to edit that blatant commercial out, Ralph said. Since I'm not paying for it, you can do anything you want, Fred said. Ralph left with a smile. He had a story, so he was satisfied. You know, I wasn't joking, the receptionist said. I would really like one of these bikes. My boyfriend is driving me to work now, I would like little more freedom. I'll tell you what, maybe we can work something out. Let me see what Kathy thinks. I know I would love to have a dozen of the bikes out there running around town. Cool. But I have the money, you don't need to work out anything, the younger man stated. We need to work a deal, then you can pick a frame, and I'll start work on it. Fred said, frankly, I'm more interested in the advertising than the profit right now. So how about I do it for cost plus $100, and you allow me to use you and the bike in my ads, and to allow a small tasteful sign on the bike, Fred suggested. Sure, so what will it cost with all the discounts? The kid wanted to know. $300 plus the battery you decide to buy. You can save that much just by not having to buy insurance, Fred suggested. I'm sold, the kid replied. So go pick your frame, Fred said. It took a complete day to assemble the bike only because it was a one-off build. If he had been organized for a multiple bike build, he could have done 3 in the same amount of time. Fred also worked out a sticker design, but didn't have one ready since it all had to come by mail. He decided he could build a sign for each side of the bike, giving his website address, which he had arranged to be very simple to remember. He had wanted the picture of a rhino on the sign, but that proved to be too complicated. So he used a lightning bolt instead. Simple graphic for the first one at least. So here's your bike. I don't have any stickers, so when they arrive, I'm going to put 3 or less stickers on it, Fred said. Now decide on the battery size, and I'll have it ready by the end of day. You can ride the whole thing home. Fred said. Kathy's friend chose a 24-volt, 15-amp-hour battery. You are sure that will get me 10 miles on a full charge. Tell you what, on your next day off, ride the bike to the Interstate Plaza. The one with the Home Depot. It is 5 miles. If you can't get back, I'll come get you and build a bigger battery for you. Fred wasn't sure if the kid did it or not, but since he never heard from him, he just figured all was well. Kathy, who was a lot more computer savvy than Fred, copied the story from the local TV station for his website. She also put a video of her receptionist on his bike. It took another month, but Fred began to make a small profit. He was down a couple of grand, but he had turned the corner. Of course, Kathy was going great gun with her clinic. She needed a lot more money than Fred did to operate. He was glad to see the traffic in his parking lot for that reason. It had taken Friedery a few months to turn the corner, but he never doubted that he would. In the geographical area where he was located, the motobike would have to be a hit. The number 1 reason was that he was in a good flat area. The number 2 reason was that he was in a position to offer service and a guarantee. The third reason was also geographic in nature. It was the weather, of course. The weather at the coast was warm enough to ride every day. Some days one might get wet, and a couple of days there was a damp cold, but it was never so wet or so cold that the bike wouldn't perform, with the exception of a hurricane. Hell, he even offered a roadside assistance program for the buyer who wanted it all and was willing to pay for it. There were only 2 of those purchased in the first 6 months. Most people bought the bikes for basic transportation. Once there were a few motos on the road, the business grew steadily. The $499 stripped-down Rhino model was the bike of choice of the college kids and the working poor. The batteries Fred built carried a 1-year guarantee because the cells were expected to last 2 years. If they had been new, they would have had a 2-year guarantee from the manufacturer. Fred had been bidding on the battery lots from the government himself lately. He won a few auction, which meant there was a battery storage room outside the building. He also sold a $39.99 battery charger. The batteries arrived at Fred's shop already charged, but he checked them anyway. He recommended that the bike owner not leave them on the charger more than 6 hours. He knew that they were probably safe on the standby mode of his charger for a couple of days. Since 6 hours was the time needed to recharge even a fully drained pack, it should be more than enough to recharge from any day's ride. He also recommended that if the bike had not been used over the last week, it be recharged till the green light came back. Usually that took no more than a half hour. That battery plan came only after Fred was sure the bike could be made well enough to be guaranteed for the full year as well. His will-on-a-will design was bulletproof. If the client was so inclined, Fred could get a heavier-duty set of wheels for a custom build. The custom builds would be few, he expected. Fred even made himself a custom paint booth for shooting the bikes. If he repainted it, added a very few bucks to the cost of the bike. There were only 2 colors available for the repainting. One was a traffic cone orange that almost glowed in the dark, and the other was stealth black. The stealth black came with a custom 48-volt hub motor, rat rod. That mother was way too fast to be on the road, but some of the kids like to run around at 45 miles an hour on a bike. On the rat rod, the beefed-up wheels were standard because Fred didn't want to get sued. The 48-volt front-wheel hub motor came directly from China, as did the 48-volt rear hub motor he used. The 2 motor was the reason the bike would do 40 miles an hour or so. Also standard with the rat rod was a $19.99 price tag. Fred had built one rat rod to show to clients, but never expected to sell it. Their second spring arrived with Fred and Kathy both working hard, but also financially secure. Fred based his success on the simple method of accounting. When there was a lot of money left in the computer program, for the 3 consecutive months, Fred called the business successful. Kathy's success formula was simple. When she was able to stop drawing from the government loan account and start to repay it, and start to pay her father rent on her half of the condo and the space in his parking lot, she considered her clinic a success. She could relocate both her closet and the clinic by the end of the first year, but she was perfectly happy with the arrangement. Well, happy enough not to change anything. Fred was spending most of his days at the shop, so when she took a day off, she had the condo to herself mostly. She even brought men home with her. They were for the most part men she met on Wrightsville Islands. In the summer, they might be college kids. In the winter, they might be businessmen attending a convention. Either way, it wasn't difficult to attract them. To be honest, there had been only one of each, and they both had rooms in the motels where she met them. She also stayed there, but the point was she could have taken them home. The only man she did take home was a computer IT man. He had come to repair her computer system at the clinic. He did things to her she had never experienced before. He visited her whenever they happened to be available at the same time. Hell, she even called him to check his schedule. Fred didn't worry about Kathy not being home on time, since after 6 months, he lost track of her schedule. Even when he knew her schedule, he didn't know it. That was because things could change at the last minute. Fred's love life was even more complicated. His problem was much different from Kathy's. Fred was still on the very sunny side of 60. He owned his own business and had no medical issues. Well, no obvious ones for Kathy to find. So widows and divorced women of all ages were attracted to him. In the terms of his generation, Fred was quite a catch. Fred had also been called an inspired lover by more than one woman. He had no idea what exactly that meant, but assumed that it was a passing mark. Also in his favor was an inland condo within a 20-minute drive of the beach. It was also a 30-minute ride via motorbike. The shop was about the same distance further inland from the condo. After the first year, both he and Kathy were happy with their positions. Their day-to-day lives were enhanced by a woman who came in every 2 weeks to clean the condo and do the laundry. She worked a full day because Fred and Kathy were both slobs. On those days, Fred went home for lunch at 11 a.m., and Kathy either went or sent the receptionist at 2 p.m. Both Kathy and her father liked to be sure the maid was working. The two of them were not trusting people. There wasn't their Aunt Lucy. She was just a stranger from a cleaning service. She was sent by a service recommended to her for the clinic. The service also had contracts with realtors and other businesses. Fred and his daughter thought they had the world by the balls. That all came crashing down on a sunny Wednesday morning during the 2nd June since their arrival in Portage. Fred heard the siren pull into the parking lot. He didn't even look up from his build since ambulances pulled into the clinic all the time. He did look up when he heard the second siren still a few hundred yards and moving fast toward the clinic. It was a WTF moment for Fred. He moved quickly to his rear door. He walked carefully over the broken pavement of the alley. Once upon a time, that strip of asphalt had been meant for trucks to unload groceries at the market's rear. Since that time was long gone, the asphalt surface was cracked and filled with potholes. When Fred saw the 2 police cars in the parking lot with their officers standing behind the doors and looking toward the clinic, he knew something had gone all to shit. Fred recognized Kathy's car and her receptionist's motorbike parked to the side of the clinic. The ambulance was still in the parking lot along with one other SUV belonging to the CRNA who had joined Kathy's practice just the week before. Beside the police car, there were 3 unknown cars in the parking lot. Fred didn't think that the CRNA would last, even before whatever was going on happened. He pretty much knew that what was going on was a hostage situation. Rather than ask the police, Fred went back into the bike shop. Once he got there, he turned on the surveillance system's dedicated notebook. With the notebook and the 5 cameras, which he had mounted in the clinic himself, he was able to see all 3 rooms and the parking lot as well. The 5th camera was on the back wall of his shop and aimed toward the front. It gave a funnel-shaped view of his shop. While the cops were dicking around waiting for some special SWAT equipment, Fred had evaluated the situation. It appeared a patient or maybe a family member was holding everyone hostage. On the audio, he heard Kathy speak in a calm voice. "This man the ambulance brought in needs to go to a hospital. If not, he is going to die." "You don't want that to happen," Kathy said. "If we'll just make all this worse. Why not let the ambulance crew take this man and get on their way? They are of no use to you. Nobody goes anywhere till I think this through, so just shut up, lady," the man who was slightly older than a teenager said. Fred checked the other 2 rooms of the clinic and found nothing. The treatment room did have a man laying on the table unconscious. Fred needed to get inside that clinic. With the cop cars in the parking lot, the situation was far past a stealth entry. He wondered why Kathy hadn't pushed the panic button. After the situation was resolved, he would check the history to see why the cops got notified before he did. The job at the moment was to neutralize the man with the gun. As Fred watched the phone in the clinic rang. Yeah, the gunman said after it had rang 10 times. Everybody is fine except for the guy the ambulance brought in. The doc says he needs to get to the hospital. Hell no, I'm not going to let them out. Fred could imagine what the cops were trying to do. They planned to drag the situation out. That was the protocol. For Fred, the fact that the protocol didn't mean shit. The protocol was not written by a man whose kid wasn't one of the hostages. Since that was the case, the protocol was useless. He didn't want to talk the a-hole out of the clinic. He wanted him to die in place. Fred used the military approach without the permission of the policeman in the parking lot. First, he killed all the power to the mobile clinic. He could do that since the clinic's power came through the main circuits of the old grocery store. It was part of why they had located the shop in an old building. Everything was on site. Adding the clinic was no more than rerouting some electric services that had gone to the freezer units when the building had been a grocery store. Fred just tripped the breakers. The inside power was gone, but the emergency battery-powered lights came on immediately. In theory, the lights would provide enough illumination for anyone in the clinic to reach the doors safely. Fred moved quickly to get into the clinic while everyone was in a state of panic and concern. He moved from his rear door to the clinic's rear. The trick to moving around a crime scene was to attack its weakest link, which was the positions guarded by the local police. He just calmly walked past the local cops like he was a state police detective. He went to the rear window of the clinic and pushed in on it. That particular window was held in by springs. On the outside, there were 2 hidden retainers. Once those were twisted, the window would fall in when enough force was applied. Fred did all the right things to get inside the clinic without making too much noise. When he was inside the building, it was in the end room, furthermost from the waiting room, where the hostages were being held. The gunman was so busy protecting himself from the door that he never realized he was in danger from his rear. Fred got within 12 feet of him, then shot him in the back of the head. Before the cops crashed the door, he put his Colt 1911 on the receptionist's desk. By the time the cops crashed through the door, Kathy was in his arms. He held her while she cried. After they waited to be evacuated, she said, "I knew you would come for me." "Of course, it's your turn to make dinner," Fred said. As the paramedics attended to the unconscious patient and the other hostages were safely escorted out, Fred stayed by Kathy's side, his arm wrapped protectively around her. Together, they walked out into the warm sunlight, the tension of the day finally beginning to fade. The police gave Fred a quick debrief, recognizing the intensity of the situation. They knew he had acted out of love and urgency, and while they had their own protocol, they couldn't help but respect Fred's bravery and determination. Kathy clung to Fred's arm as they walked back to his bike shop, feeling safe now that they were together. She glanced up at him, her eyes sparkling with admiration. "You were incredible, Fred. I don't think I've ever seen anyone move like that." Fred chuckled, pulling her closer. "I just couldn't let you stay in there. I had to do something." Back at the bike shop, Fred turned on the lights and set out a couple of beers from the fridge. They settled onto the couch, the day's events still fresh, but the immediate danger gone. Kathy leaned her head on Fred's shoulder, exhaling deeply. "You really are my hero," she said, snuggling closer. Fred kissed the top of her head, smiling as he looked down at her. "And you're my world, Kathy. I'd do it all over again if it meant keeping you safe." They spent the rest of the evening together, enjoying a quiet dinner that Fred had whipped up, simple, comforting, and exactly what they needed. Laughter slowly filled the room, pushing away the lingering shadows of the day. As they sat on the porch later, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Fred took Kathy's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "We make a pretty good team, you know," he said, his voice warm with affection. Kathy smiled, looking up at him with a soft, grateful expression. "Yeah, we do. And I wouldn't want to be with anyone else." Fred pulled her close, and they sat together in comfortable silence, knowing that whatever challenges came next, they would face them side by side. In that moment, wrapped in each other's arms, everything felt right. Fred raised his beer. "To us, and to always having each other's backs." Kathy clinked her bottle against his. "To us," she echoed, her voice filled with love. And as the stars began to dot the sky, Fred and Kathy knew that no matter what happened, they would always find their way back to each other, safe, strong, and together. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.